We're here with David Friedman, and he gave a talk on how to introduce principles of feuds into our justice system. And last year he gave a talk about giving control of prosecution to the victims. And so I wanted to ask him some questions about both these issues.
My talk was not about how to introduce feud to our system. It was about how historical systems in which law was enforced in a private and decentralized manner worked, of which there are a fair number, and what that might suggest for possible ways that a modern system might work. But it was mostly about the historical issue.
So what was your objective in both of these talks?
To spread ideas.
The ultimate objective.
The ultimate objective is to spread ideas.
Why did you want to spread those ideas?
Because they're interesting ideas. They might improve the world. They might just interest people and help people understand the world a little bit better. That people tend to take it for granted that things have to be done in the way they're now being done. That isn't the case. And by looking at other ways in which they have been done or could be done, one, I think, makes more sense of the world, one considers possible changes in the world. But I'm not a politician. I'm not trying to legislate. I am trying to spread ideas which may affect other people, which may or may not change what the world is like that I live in.
Right. So you want other people to learn about these ideas, and what is it that you want them to do about that once they learn about how to give control to the?
That will be up to them. What they might do is discover my ideas are wrong and tell me, and that would be a benefit to me if I would discover more about it. What they might do is to improve on the ideas. What they might do is to try to implement them in legislation. But I'm not basically a reformer. I'm basically interested in the ideas. And I like to say that my first book had only one good review, and it was by Jim Buchanan. And the reason it was a good review was that it was a review that made me think. So that the third edition of that book has a chapter which is basically a response to a criticism that Jim Buchanan made in his review a long time ago. And that's a much bigger benefit to me than if somebody agrees with me.
Well, let me ask you. So you're not interested in whether these ideas are implemented or not. You don't care.
It would be nice, but it's not that I don't care. It is that I am not out there crusading to try to change the law. If my ideas are right, I hope they are implemented. If they're wrong, I hope they're not.
Right. So, but if you have good ideas, the payoff of understanding good ideas is to implement them, right?
That's certainly part of the payoff, yes.
Well, if you don't implement them, you don't get the benefit.
Well, you also might get the benefit of understanding the past better. If you want to make sense of the world, which is one of the things human beings want to do, knowing how institutions worked in the past is of use to making sense of history. So one of the reasons to learn these things is to improve your own system, but there are other reasons that I like. In the course of the talk I gave today, I suggested one respect in which the American legal system was 1,000 years behind the cutting edge of legal technology, and then another respect in which was 2,400 years behind. In each of these cases, there was an institution from a past society that I thought it was arguable would improve our society. I'm not positive it would.
But what's the point in getting knowledge if you don't put it in practice?
I can get knowledge and someone else can put it into practice, and somebody else can decide for himself whether the knowledge is correct.
So you would like them to put it into practice. How would they be able?
I hope that when other people do things to the law,
right,
one of the things that will influence them will be my ideas.
How is it that these ideas can be put into practice? How can they become part of the legal system?
Well, first, it doesn't have to be part of our legal system. That some of the ideas there are lots of ways of affecting behavior that aren't formally legal. If you think about systems of norms, for example, or
if you have a justice system and it says this is the way the state is going to control it, the victim is out of it. Either you pass legislation to change that or you don't. As long as you don't pass the legislation to change it, the state will still have control and not the victim.
Very likely, but you can also set up Universities have their own internal legal systems. You can set up systems of arbitration online. So it's the state legal system isn't the only game in town. It's just one very big game in town. So all I'm saying is I don't think of what I'm doing as getting people to write model penal codes. I think of what I'm doing as spreading ideas which might be used by somebody to do that or in many other ways.
So the way that the legal system would be changed is if you persuade many people that this is a better approach to the legal system, and then they go out and vote for candidates that will change the law.
That's one way.
And then we have a different legal system, right?
That's one way it could happen, or it could happen as a result of judges making decisions which in effect change the system, which is one way common law changes. If you change, for example, what the
right.
talk,
okay,
the,
so you would
the
talk
that I gave, I think a year ago, if I remember correctly, which one it was, which is the one that I refer to as "Should we abolish criminal law?" was suggesting treating things we treat crimes more nearly the way we treat torts. So you treat it as an offense against the victim rather than against the state.
Right.
One way that could happen would be courts saying, this lawsuit is permitted, we interpret that as within the law. Another way is by the legislature changing the law. Those are both ways in our system.
You think it's possible for a judge to say, this person committed murder, we're not going to put him in jail or prosecute him, we're going to let the victim's family take care of it? You think any judge in the United States would ever do that?
You're putting it the wrong way around. I think it is possible for a judge to say, this person is accused of killing someone, and the family of the victim is entitled to sue him under tort law, which is precisely what happened to O.J.
Right.
in that case. So the question of to what degree tort claims can be used for what offenses is in part something that judges decide whether or not they accept it.
Their jurisdiction is limited and their power is limited. The way that actually it could be put in place, your ideas, is by changing the law. That
is one of the ways in which the idea is
okay. Now, in order for the law to be changed, you would have to people would have to vote for candidates that believed in changing the law, right?
That's a little too simple. They might vote for candidates not because they believed in changing the law, but for entirely different reasons. So you would have to have candidates who, for some reason, decided to vote for a change in the law.
Right, and if so, in order to have better than a freak accident, you would have to distinguish between candidates that believe in your law and those that don't, and vote for those that do.
I think you are subscribing to what I think of. I remember what the term is I usually use, but basically for the naive theory of politics, in which the way a democratic system works is that politicians do what the voters want because otherwise they'll get voted out. And the problem with that is that the individual voter has no incentive to know either what politicians do or what they ought to do, because the individual voter knows that the chance of his vote affecting the election is very close to zero. So therefore it's much more nearly that the that the voters vote for the people who look handsome or who give them good speeches or who do whatever Trump has been doing recently to get votes.
So you can't persuade them, and they can't act based on the knowledge that you imparted, and that.
I might be able to
But
persuade.
you think it's naive and stupid for them to waste time voting, right?
No, they enjoy voting.
No, I mean, if they're voting for the purpose of changing the law in this fundamental way that you're suggesting, that would be a waste of time.
From the standpoint of an individual voter, to vote, at least in a national election, with the purpose of getting somebody elected who will do good things is a foolish mistake. To vote because you enjoy supporting someone.
Right, but that would be a state issue, not a federal issue.
If you had
police power, criminal law, you want to change the criminal law. Really, the only real chance, as far as I can see, is that you persuade individuals to vote for candidates that actually believe in what you're saying.
Let me suggest a different way you do it.
But
a different way is that you persuade legal academics, law professors and judges and people like that, of a different view of the law, which is often the way the law actually changes. and then they tell the legislators, look, everybody thinks the law should be A instead of B, and the legislators who know perfectly well that the voters know very little about this say, yeah, sounds like a good idea, we'll do it. So you might try to persuade the voters. That's probably not a very sensible strategy. You might try to persuade people who are interested in ideas of the law, and in that way change what happens.
So, how many of these judges have you been persuading? Because as far as I can tell, you're writing for the general public, and you give lectures for the general public, not for judges. And even if you did persuade the judges, I don't think that they could change the system that radically.
If all of the judges
I think the politicians care less about what the judges think than they care about what the voters think. I think they really care about what the voters think.
except that the voters don't really know very much about what's going on, and the politicians are themselves living in a society of sort of educated, active people whose views they care about. And if it turned out that the orthodox view among lots of law professors and lots of judges was you should change in a certain way, that would be a reason for politicians to change in that way. They'd get invited to better cocktail parties.
You think they would do that in spite of what the voters thought?
Not in spite. I'm saying these would likely to be issues where the voters paid very little attention, didn't know much about it.
Oh, they wouldn't notice that the murderer doesn't go to jail and that the victim is the one that controls the case?
Any change which occurs is not going to consist of revolutionizing the legal system overnight. It would consist of expanding the range of things for which tort cases were considered appropriate and contracting the range for which criminal ones.
Okay. Let me ask